The Turnaround Artists is a podcast about turning things around when they don't go our way. Tune in each week to hear stories of impressive personal and professional turnarounds from a variety of interesting guests. This podcast was inspired by the recent happy turnarounds of its producers, Marisa Mitchell and me, Brian McFarland. We look forward to speaking with you. Welcome to episode 6 of The Turnaround Artists. Last week, we took you to Tucson, Arizona, where our guest was in the middle of a solo walk across America to raise awareness for mental fitness. Today, we're bringing you another powerful personal story from a very strong young woman who works as an occupational therapist in Chicago. Cori Fischer, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Brian and Marisa. I'm so excited to be here, and I just want to thank you again for such an incredible opportunity to be featured on your podcast.
Oh, well, the feeling is mutual, and we're happy to have you here. And I believe you said in 20-degree Chicago, so I hope you're staying warm.
Yes.
All right. So, Cori, you decided to become an occupational therapist for very personal reasons. Can you share with our listeners from the beginning what led you into that field?
Yeah, so before I begin sharing my story, I wanted to ask everyone a question. I want everyone to think about, what does movement mean to you? It can have different meanings to a variety of individuals. It can mean the physical ability of how we move through our everyday life, but it can also mean a change or development in our life. And movement has had a very personal meaning to me, and really, I would say, has kind of defined my life over the last 13 years and continues to do so. So, as an infant, I was diagnosed with mild static diplegic cerebral palsy due to some tremors and spasticity. I outgrew these symptoms, and I was a competitive gymnast, a soccer player, a cheerleader. Really, I didn't have any limitation. But then, unfortunately, in 2012, at the age of 12 years old, I started to have progressive neurological symptoms, and no one really knew why. I traveled all over to many different medical facilities in different states with my family, trying to figure out a diagnosis. My legs would buckle from underneath me, and it started to progress into my arms too, so really affecting my arms and my legs. I was eventually diagnosed with what we thought was a movement disorder called dystonia. And for those of you who have not heard what dystonia is, it's a movement disorder that causes your muscles to contract, which can then cause twisting motions or other movements that happen repeatedly and are not under your control. But flash forward to summer of 2022, and I was, then 22 years old at that point, and had gone through 11 orthopedic surgeries. I was diagnosed with a tethered spinal cord during my last year of graduate school for occupational therapy. So pretty much from 13 years old to 22 years old, I thought I had dystonia, but I was diagnosed with a tethered spinal cord.
Wow. Okay. Share with me, what's the mindset? Teenage years are hard enough. You're bouncing around doing your thing, literally, and then all of a sudden, what kind of happens that you feel like you can't do that anymore, or how did that kind of work?
Yeah, I just really, out of the blue, my legs just started collapsing underneath me, and the buckling was so bad that I ended up with fractures, down my leg. It progressed very fast, which was, of course, scary for a young 13-year-old girl who's used to being so active. So it was very terrifying.
So now you have to head into this whole other track, right? So you have to say goodbye to your soccer team, say goodbye to gymnastics, things you're passionate about and love. and now you have to start another journey, right? All right. So take us from there. 11 surgeries in 22 years.
Um, so yeah, like you'd said, I was diagnosed with a tethered spinal cord during my last year of graduate school for occupational therapy. And for those of you who don't know what a tethered spinal cord is, it's typically found at birth or during puberty. So they're not really sure if mine was, actually a tethered spinal cord instead of cerebral palsy, or if maybe this occurred at puberty. We won't ever know that. Um, but typically found at birth or during puberty, and is when your spinal cord is actually pulled tightly at the end, which then reduces blood flow to the spinal nerves and damages the spinal cord. And unfortunately, due to another surgery I had prior, I had already started to lose movement in my left leg due to some nerve damage. And so when I found out I had a tethered spinal cord, I was told I needed surgery as soon as possible.
Wow. Now, let me ask, when you're going through these things, is there a lot of pain involved?
Yeah, there was a lot of pain, especially from all of the orthopedic surgeries. I mean, some of my surgeries, they were breaking my femur and my tibia and rotating them. So it was excruciating pain that I would not wish upon anyone, especially at such a young age.
Wow. And then, because I'm curious, so your teenage years are brutal on a good day. How, like, logistically, are you even going to school and educating yourself?
So when I was having surgery, I was pretty much homeschooled because there was no way I could sit in a classroom. We were traveling to the Cleveland Clinic pretty much every other week, just trying different treatments and still trying to figure out what exactly was going on. So really, I would say that my middle school and high school years were definitely different than most peers my age.
With your friends or your family, and your community or your peer group, how did that work? What kind of support were you getting emotionally? Were you kind of isolated from other teenagers?
Yeah,
What's your social life like?
I have the most amazing family. So really, they were there for me every step of the way. Um, you know, at that age, when you're 12 or 13, friends are hard, right? It's a hard time for everyone, I feel like, and so I definitely lost some friends and everything just because I was at such a different stage of life than everyone else was having to deal with, right? Most at that age are thinking about what to wear or who to date or what party to go to, and I was just worried about walking. And so I had to really learn at a young age what was truly important and what isn't, because I was just going through such a different time than most other individuals my age.
Did you ever get to a moment where you were just like, why me? Everybody else is running around. My friends are still doing gymnastics. They're still playing soccer. Why me?
I definitely had those moments, especially because you're young at that age, right? You're still learning so much and still trying to figure out who you are and what your life's going to look like. I definitely grieved, my legs, right? Because I was a competitive gymnast, I was a soccer player, I was a cheerleader, and honestly loved working out. Um, but you get to choose how you react to everything, right? You get to choose how you interact with each and every person you face throughout the day, and you get to choose how you leave that person. There are days where I want to have a cry sesh, of course, still to this day, but it's all about perspective. And I'm here, and I get to choose how I put a smile on my face and how I go about my day, because you get to choose the life you want to live. And um, it was definitely not how I pictured my life to be, right? But I've learned so much through all of it.
Yeah. Was there a moment that you specifically remember where you're kind of just pivot and change your mindset? Was that something you remember?
I think it was honestly after my tethered spinal cord surgeries. Um, I mean, I've always kind of had this I can attitude. I like to, prove people wrong if they're like, oh, you're not going to be able to do this. You're not going to be able to do that. I like to, I'm a very driven person and like to prove them wrong in that sense. But um, I've always wanted to be an occupational therapist from a young age just because of the personal experiences I have had. And especially, it really started with my physical medicine and rehab physician, the incredible impact he made on me and continues to have on me to this day. And really, his other patients, I really wanted to be able to give back to patients in the same way that he had done for me. Um, and so, as OTs, we are the ones that make things work no matter the obstacles. And we really figure out how to adapt to be able to allow our patients to achieve their goals. So that's really why I fell in love with the field of occupational therapy. And so, after my tethered spinal cord surgery, I faced a challenge I didn't expect. When I woke up from my tethered spinal cord surgery, I really had no movement and very minimal sensation below my belly button, which we weren't expecting at all. I didn't have any idea that I was gonna pretty much be paralyzed and in a wheelchair. Um, but I was told movement may come back over the next few years or it may not. So then after the surgery, that's when I was transferred to Shirley Ryan Ability Lab to start rehabbing. And I think this is honestly where my mindset switched a little bit because um, I was supposed to be completing my level 2 fieldworks as an occupational therapy student. It's where, as an occupational therapy student, we have to complete 2 level 2 fieldworks that are 12 weeks long. And you have to pass those successfully in order to be able to sit for your boards to become an occupational therapist. So while I was in the rehab hospital, I was supposed to be an occupational therapy student, learning from the occupational therapist. But instead of being the occupational therapy student in training, I was the patient, learning every day how to transfer myself without the use of my legs, how to adapt and complete daily tasks, and really how to be independent and navigate life in a wheelchair. And I think, that's really when my mindset kind of switched because I was in the hospital from August to November, and people had told me you don't have to go back to school. You are dealing with a lot. But the more I thought about it, I'm like, what am I going to be showing people who I would be working with if I didn't go back to become an occupational therapist? Because we're all about making things work and adapting to our best ability to be able to achieve the accomplishments we want.
Right.
And I knew I had this thought that I was behind, right? What college grad student wouldn't if you're in the hospital while everyone else is, moving on and completing their clinicals. But I had realized that I was not behind. In fact, I was anything but behind, as I had received firsthand experience with the struggles and the extreme frustrations my patients would go through, and really the hardships they would face with a world that is inaccessible.
First off, Marisa and I, we said that woman is going places. I know you're going to achieve whatever you want to achieve. You'll probably be running the Cleveland Clinic by the time you're 30. That was made very clear within 5 minutes. I have two questions for you. First, as you head into each surgery, and how many
Mhm.
have you had to date in total?
I've actually had now 17. I'm more
Se-
than likely going to be having an 18th in March, unfortunately, but
in March. Okay. Well, we've got to get your mailing address because we're big letter writers. We told you that yesterday. So 17 surgeries. Did you, when you head into each surgery, and they're all different, obviously, what did the doctors and you and your family, was there always hope, like this is going to be the one that makes things different? And then if or there was or wasn't, when it got worse or it didn't get better, just tell me what that's like.
Yeah, most of the time it always was like, this is going to be better, right? But unfortunately, because no one really knew the true cause of it until 2022, um, surgeries really didn't fix the issue, the root cause, because that wasn't the root cause. Um, so it was definitely very terrifying, right? Because you're going through multiple surgeries, and you know why isn't the outcome what I expected? So I had I think one of the main lessons I've had to learn through all of this is just go with the flow because everything has just been so unexpected and just not exactly how I planned, right? Which life isn't a lot of times. It's out of our control. But um it was really hard. It was very hard, especially with being so young.
I can't even imagine. Another testament to your strength. Everybody you hope has your best
Mhm.
interest in mind. Do you ever get like mad? Like, how are you people not figuring this out?
I think the most frustrating part was we went so many places, so many different medical facilities, and some of the most frustrating parts were some of the physicians really didn't even take a look, right? They didn't even do an exam. They're just like, we don't know. We don't know. It was just like, oh, we saw your chart. We don't know. We don't know. Really, we drove 3.5 hours to come see you. Like, you can at least do an exam. You can, you know, I had to learn how to advocate for myself too, pretty young, because navigating the medical world is definitely hard, and especially when you are that young, um, it's very hard because what physician is going to believe a 12 or 13-year old, right? Versus more of an adult. Um, and so, actually, I have one of my favorite quotes that I wanted to mention. Um, is from Her name is Nidra, and she talks about advocacy. And so she says that I hope you outgrow allowing discomfort to stop you from advocating for yourself. You will never feel comfortable acting in your best interest by avoiding acting in your best interest. And so I had to learn that at a young age. And I would say, even the fact that now, I live independently in Chicago, 3.5 hours away from my family. And, my parents were always my biggest advocate. And it wasn't until recently that, I realized that relying on others to advocate for me wasn't a long term solution. And self advocating, it really is not easy because you are forced to explain your needs, um, and why that individual should care, right? And then you're hoping the individual or the receiver not only empathizes, but takes that information and makes an adequate plan to address the issues. But it can be really difficult, and some individuals would rather just not engage in self advocacy, and just let whatever is continuing to happen because it isn't easy. It's very difficult to advocate.
Thank you for sharing that. That's so powerful. And the purpose of this program is really to inspire people, and you are certainly doing that already. You went through all this and learned on the other side, so it's really amazing.
Well,
Um,
thank you. Yeah, I think it's just so heartbreaking, right? When maybe this diagnosis could have been figured out earlier on, and so then symptoms wouldn't have gotten so bad and things wouldn't have progressed to the point to where they are. And I try not to look in the past because it doesn't do anything for us, but sometimes it's very difficult not to, just because you wonder, what life would have looked like if things were caught sooner or treated sooner.
Right, because in the end, right, like you just said, you can only look forward,
Hmm.
um, and it doesn't help to look in the past. But
Right.
it's so impressive that you got that. Before I do, I want to ask you a question because I also want to have you paint a picture for us all when you're in the. I was just thinking when you're in the hospital from August to November, you're living there, right? You're there
Hmm.
24/7.
Hmm.
What is life like for that many months in a hospital?
It was very difficult. um, but I had the opportunity to meet so many amazing people through it. I would say it was probably some of my darkest days. I'm not going to lie, because, like I had said, I didn't expect to be in a wheelchair. So, um, rehabbing and trying to learn everything new from a wheelchair level, it's just a different way of learning life. Of course, it was frustrating, but it was also an amazing experience with just some of the individuals I was able to meet, um, and really just help with my perspective, right? Because you never know what others are going through, and the the patient living in the room next to you, it really shifts your perspective when you think you're going through something more difficult, but then the patient in the room next to you is going through something even harder, and you realize, like I got this, I can do this. But it was not easy. It was very difficult. But luckily, I had amazing support system, amazing physicians, amazing occupational therapists, physical therapists, nurses who really pushed me to be my very best. And that's actually how I ended up um, really having my career. I was able to network with these different individuals at Shirley Ryan Ability Lab when I was rehabbing, and this allowed me the incredible opportunity to, a year later, after my spinal cord surgeries and everything, come back as a student and do one of my fieldwork rotations with them. And then a year later, be offered a position there, as for a career. So it was very difficult, but it's an amazing place that really changed my life and was really a full circle moment, being able to go from a patient to, an occupational therapy student to then an occupational therapist all in the same hospital. It was a full circle moment.
That's incredible. Thank you for sharing that. During that time, from say August to November, what kind of things would make you happy?
Yeah. So the patients next to me, two of the patients, we became really close, and would hang out every night. We'd watch movies, and we were all going through really difficult times. So being able to, share our hardships and empathize with each other, even though we were all going through completely different situations, that made my day. I also think when my mindset switched, instead of being the occupational therapy student learning from the occupational therapist, when I switched my mindset to, all right, like I'm the patient now learning from the occupational therapist how to do this stuff. And these are the different adaptive strategies that I'm going to be teaching my patients. So, I need to learn this and I need to know how to do it. So I think having that mindset switch also really helped. And then just knowing that I had an amazing support system around me, and that if I needed to cry and let it out, I could, because we're all allowed to do that and we all should do that. Um, and I think those are some of the main things that made me made me happy.
I love your laugh as well. You're brightening up everyone's day. What were some anecdotes you had shared with us yesterday a little bit that were particularly meaningful that you experienced during this process?
Yeah, so when I was an occupational therapy student, there are a few instances actually that really, gave me that reason why I do what I want to do, right, every day. So there was a young teenager with a high level spinal cord injury, and we were working on computer access. And he would turn to me and be like, "Wait, so you went back to school?" And I'd be like, "Yeah." And then he'd go back in the computer. And then he'd turn to me again and be like, "Wait, you cook by yourself? Like you make your own food? And then I'd be like, yeah. And then he'd go back in his computer and then he'd turn again and be like, wait, you live by yourself? And so I just think it really got his wheels turning to realize that, despite being in a wheelchair, this is one thing I like to tell my patients all the time. Despite being in a wheelchair, we can really do anything we desire. It just might look a bit different. And I think, being able to inspire those patients to show them that, you can really do anything you still want to do. We just have to find a different way of doing it. Um, so that was one very special moment. Another one was um, an occupational therapist actually on the peds floor had asked me to come and teach a 5-year old with a spinal cord injury how to navigate in a wheelchair, just, how to push a wheelchair. So rolling it through the hallways and how to transfer, onto the mat table without the use of her legs. And, um, that was also just such an incredible moment because I love being able to show, these young, young children, what is possible, right? And that they don't have to do it alone. We're all here to support them and we can provide such an impact on individuals. And so that was also a really cool moment. And then another one I have in mind is there was an older gentleman actually with a spinal cord injury, and he was really upset and was having a really hard time. And he told me, typically when he's at work, he goes and hides in his office and closes his door. And he thanked me for opening his door. As I had told him, if you need to talk about it, if you need to let it out, like I am here for you. You don't need to keep it in. That's not going to help you at all. And so he thanked me for opening his door and coming into his office because typically people don't see when he's upset and he doesn't let them see. So he just shuts the door and hides. So that was also just a really, really meaningful moment, right? Because um, just by, opening up and asking someone if they, need to let it out or need to talk, he thanked me for opening his door. So that was also really cool.
Wow. You just didn't open his door, right? You opened his life, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because as we talked about in our last episode about mental illness and mental fitness, so when someone closes their door, not good things are going to happen. So, Cori, when we had spoke yesterday, you shared some incredible lessons. So, I would welcome you sharing those lessons with our listeners because I think we'd all take a lot away from them.
Yeah, so I have some lessons that I have learned throughout this journey. And I actually had the chance to speak about these lessons at my high school graduation, but these lessons are still so applicable to everyone at really every stage of life. And I'm excited to share them with you guys. um, so, lesson number one is do not wait for the perfect moment to pursue or try something new because it may never exist. When I was in, middle school and high school, I kept saying, as soon as this is fixed, I'm going to fill in the blank. As soon as I can walk, as soon as I have the surgery, as soon as and I felt like, I was always waiting for the next thing, right? And, goals are great, right? We love goals, but you realize that, you have to enjoy the journey and each day as it comes. Um, because things are not going to be perfect once you hit that goal. It's not going to be all happy and rainbows as soon as something happens, right?
That's a great lesson. Thank you for sharing that.
And then the next lesson is to always look for unforeseen teachers. As I had mentioned before, I have the most incredible physical medicine and rehab physician who was one of my biggest role models, as he had never given up on me and continued to really, fight until we figured out what was going on. I wanted to mention my amazing and incredible neurosurgeon. I think of him as a mentor and a friend, and he has always been there for me through this hard journey, since the spinal surgeries. And what was really special is when I was in the hospital, he actually invited me to sit on his nonprofit board as a patient advocate for his board called SMERF, which stands for Student Mentorship Education and Research Fellowship. And it focuses on diversity, equity, and inclusion in the field of neurosurgery. It's a really neat nonprofit, and I'm really honored to be a part of it. So I'm going to give a quick shout out because if you want to check it out or want to look into it more, if you go to smurf.org, you can see more about our the nonprofit. But that was another part of moving forward for me, and now getting the experience to be a patient advocate. There's really a purpose for those that you meet. Some people come into your life to test you. Some may come into your life to use you. Some come into your life to teach you, and some to bring out the very best in you.
That's awesome. And for our listeners, I want to make sure. So it's smerf.org, correct?
Yes, it is. So,
All right. I'm learning so much. So continue
yes.
onward with the lessons. Please do.
Another lesson, this is lesson number 3. So many of us try to project an image of perfection, but we are all imperfect and all have challenges. And so striving for perfection is a path to failure, because we often do learn the most from our mistakes. And most often, those who want to take the biggest risks and are willing to fail enjoy the most reward. And so failing does not mean giving up. It means you just have to get back up and try again. And if you are ready for failure, then you are ready for growth. And so FAIL actually stands for first attempt in learning. End is not the end. It means effort never dies. And if you get no as an answer, it just means next opportunity. And sometimes you just need to redefine your definition of success.
You should be in sales. There's no doubt because I have a very same viewpoint as you, except I'm almost 3 times older. But every time I try and coach a young salesperson and they told me no, I smile and go, that's great. And they're like, why? And I'm like, well, on average in sales, it takes 7 no's to get to yes. So it's turning it around and saying, well, each no you get, you're closer to yes, right?
Right,
And
exactly.
it also is practice progress, not perfection. I 100%
Right,
agree with you because I don't care how much you practice, no one will ever be perfect, right? You
right,
can always get better, but you should just never stop progressing. So, yeah,
exactly.
with you. Great mindset.
Yeah.
All right. So continue on, teacher.
Lesson number 4 is not everything is fixable, and sometimes life just sucks. Which, sorry, mom and dad, because I know they hate that word. But sometimes it really does just suck, and there is nothing to do but cope, and coping is hard work. Um, and we necessarily can't fix it, but we can move forward.
I love that. I love that. Yeah, and I'm sure your mom and dad will be very proud to hear your voice and to hear this story. So, all right. So bring us home with lesson number 5.
I think one of my most powerful lessons is the importance of grit, which is a term taken from Dr. Angela Duckworth's TED Talk. Grit means the passion and perseverance to take on a long term goal. And so, over the course of all of these years, I've learned that a singular thing, like not being able to walk, a test score, or another obstacle, does not define our ability to succeed. If I let this define me, I would not have graduated with my master's in occupational therapy. I would have not gone to school 4 hours away from my family, and I would not be living independently in Chicago. Grit is really our willingness to put in the work, whether it's in our academics, our extracurricular activities, or in my case, adapting to navigating life in a wheelchair, that ultimately leads to achieving our goals. And I've learned that we grow the most when we face challenges, but it's the grit that truly defines who we are.
I could not agree more. That's a lesson that will withstand the test of time for sure. So thank you for that. And Cori, I want to bring it home for our listeners. So we love to close out each episode of the Turnaround Artists, and you are a turnaround artist in every exceptional way, with sort of the one big takeaway from your life story and what you've overcome.
Yeah, so I think it's perspective, right? I think it truly is amazing the transformation that can happen when we shift our perspective. It comes in the choices we make and how we decide to move forward. My journey has been anything but easy. Went from being a competitive gymnast to having difficulty walking to, believing I had dystonia for, around 11 years to then being diagnosed with a tethered spinal cord and then, losing movement from my waist down and navigating life in a wheelchair. But I've had so many immense amount of opportunities because of what I've gone through and the movement that I have chosen to go being forward. One thing that also comes to my mind with this is a lot of people ask me like, don't you want to be in a power wheelchair, right? Like, wouldn't life just be easier to navigate in a power wheelchair? But one thing that I've realized is that my wheelchair is my gym. I used to be a competitive gymnast. I loved flipping around and working out. Um, but now, my arms are my legs. So I roll to the grocery store. Like I had mentioned before, I love going to the track and just putting my headphones in and rolling, um, and really using my arms to their most potential. And it's a workout when putting my pants on or shoes on because of having legs that are paralyzed. They're heavy. But I get to do everything to my best ability, and it just might look a bit different, but I get to choose how I live my life, and I want to live it to the best that I can and with full potential. If there's one thing I wanted to mention too, just
Of
to the
course.
audience, is yes, I have a positive outlook, but it's not always, right? We have our days, and we have to let ourselves have our days, because it's not healthy if we leave it in. Um, and with having undergone so many surgeries and now being paralyzed, I've really learned that healing is not linear. Happiness and heartbreak can coincide, and you can really have some of the greatest joys in your life while also living through tough times. Perspective isn't about finding the light at the end of the tunnel, it's about finding the light within.
Wow, Cori, you definitely have a side or other career as a motivational speaker. There's no doubt you should and probably will wind up on your own TED Talk. I could easily see that happening. So, and it sounds like the sky's the limit for you. So, thank you so much for sharing your story and sharing your outlook on life. I know it was certainly inspirational to me, and I'm sure everyone you touch feels enlightened and made very special. So thank you for the person you are.
Thank you again for giving me this amazing opportunity.